Hello and welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today I'm joined by Collin Stewart. Collin started his career in 2008 in equipment sales and marketing for 4 years before co-founding his first company, Voltage CRM, followed by co-founding his second company, Carburetor, where they helped companies build their outbound sales teams based on the cold calling 2.0 framework from Aaron Ross's Predictable Revenue book. In 2014, Carburetor merged with Predictable Revenue, leading Collin to his most recent and current venture, where he serves today and for the last decade as CEO of Predictable Revenue. 5 years ago, I had a viral conversation with Aaron Ross about whether or not the SDR model or Predictable Revenue is broken. The full discussion is available on YouTube if you want to check it out, but a lot has happened since then, and I'm curious to learn firsthand from Collin what's actually going on at Predictable Revenue and how they pivoted or evolved their services to adapt with the quickly changing B2B sales landscape. Before we get started, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave us a comment if you have questions or feedback. If you're joining us from Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please drop us a review and let us know what you think of the episode. This is much appreciated. Without further ado, let's dive in and get his thoughts. Collin, thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Collin.
Likewise. It's been, like I said, it's been about 5 years since I had that. I don't want to call it a debate because I think it was really just more of a conversation, but maybe we market it as a debate, I think, and that's why it went quite viral. But I want to get your thoughts here, and I've been asking, I've done, I'm losing track at this point. We're up to this is 42 now, and I started on, I want to say episode 13, where I started diving into all these questions. So there's been a lot of interviews on these topics, and I want to get your thoughts because you're probably, I think, arguably closer to this than anyone. And especially it's a hot topic for you because it's literally the name of your company, and people talk about the book, and it gets brought up in these debates all the time and all that sort of stuff. But for a little background, so I've changed the way that I've sort of asked this first question, and I'm going to change it a little bit more for you to be specific to your business. But like I was asking people, what's broken with B2B outbound and how did we get here? But I changed the way I was asking it because it was a little bit presumptive of like assuming that people agree with me that it's broken. And so then I was asking people like, is B2B outbound broken, dead, or dying? If so, how? But what I want to ask you is just kind of apply that to predictable revenue. And so let's just say, is predictable revenue, aka cold calling 2.0, broken, dead, or dying? If yes, how so? Wherever you want to go with that topic, let's start there as a foundation.
Cool. I'd love to answer the question in two different timelines, if that's cool. Because I think there's the first timeline is 2021, 2022. If you asked me this question, I would have given you a dramatically different answer. In 2021, 2022, I think if you look at the aggregate of all outbound companies using outbound, I think it was being used in areas where there was zero chance of the team being profitable. I think if you think about the fundraising environment, there was so much cash going around, and the mantra was growth at all costs. And what that meant was hundreds of SDRs being hired, thousands of emails sent per SDR, very little time and attention paid to the people that they were reaching out to, the reason behind why they were reaching out. Everybody was trying to open up a new market, expand, go into a new vertical, make a new offering. I think the reason why we saw so much backlash against predictable revenue, PR is kind of the poster child of, it's the book that started all this. So I understand where all the animosity towards PR and the outbound PR as a proxy for outbound comes from. I agree with a lot of the sentiment from 2022, 2021. There were a ton of teams that were not profitably using outbound. I don't think that's the fault of the methodology. And if you look at it in aggregate, I'd say the GPA was lower than it usually was because there were a lot of teams that were getting D's and F's. I think with the change in mindset from 2021 to say 2025, where we are now, the growth at all costs has gone away and maybe is edging its way back into the mindset just a little bit with all the AI pieces coming back. But I think people have learned the word profitable. And they're at least thinking about it quite a bit more when they're building teams. I don't think we're seeing quite as many companies building SDR teams of 500 or 1,000 at a time. And so I think fast forward to today, we are seeing a lot of profitable sales development teams. Now, these two things can be true. And I like to think about just any outbound channel as it kind of exists on, do you know the technology adoption lifecycle? Jeffrey Moore made it popular in Crossing the Chasm, but it was actually about farming, the implementation of farming technology back in the
I
early
actually
1900s.
feel like I just saw that posted somewhere. I don't have it memorized, but I feel like I actually may have just seen that. If you want to maybe refresh my memory.
For sure. So they basically looked at this was like a study, a scientific study back in the early, I think it was early 1900s,
This was like
could be
early
mid
adopters and then like
1940s.
I forget the
Exactly.
terms for it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's the innovators; those are the folks to use the technology first. Then there's the early adopters. Then there's the early majority. Then the
Early
late
majority,
majority,
right,
and the
right.
laggards.
Was it
And
you who
Jeffrey
just
Moore's
wrote
book.
on this? I know I just read this, like I want to say a couple days ago somewhere,
You know,
or
it
just
might have
coincidence,
been.
maybe.
I wrote a post about it about a month and a half ago, and then our content engine at PR kind of spits it back out in
I
various
may have just
places.
seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that outbound demand or like any marketing channel follows the technology adoption lifecycle. There's innovators, there's the early majority, et cetera, with one key difference. Typically, as a technology penetrates a new market, it can become more valuable. I think the inverse is true with an outbound channel or a demand gen channel. As the I think it's the innovators, the early majority, the early adopters that get the majority of the benefits. The more people that come to the channel, the more I'd say congested the channel gets. So the higher the table stakes go. And I think in 2021, we had a phenomenal amount of people crowding up the channel. The table stakes were extremely high because when there's lots of SDR traffic, whether it's phone, LinkedIn, email, you've got to do a lot to stand out. And I don't think the tech and the tools had really evolved to a place they hadn't evolved at all since sales loft and outreach. I'll put it that way. You know, like those two tools, and that's what I was trying to build with Carb. Um, those two tools brought us the ability to send a mail merge and like a complex mail merge. And I don't mean to, I'm not trying to belittle them by any means, but that's the kind of fundamental thing that we were trying to do before was like automate email and phone.
Yeah. And for people who
Right.
may not know, there's maybe new people in sales that came after mail merge. I mean, mail merge was just a concept of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory of mail merge, I was using Yesware, and then eventually they built that into Gmail, and it was just templates, right? And I remember
Yeah.
when we would beg, I remember specifically begging Yesware. We were paying $5 a month for it. That's all it cost at the time. I don't even know if it's still around, but I remember
They are.
begging them. I was like, I was in charge. I was the head of sales training for single platform at the time, and we would set up these templates in Yesware, and I would have to go around and manually set them up in everyone's Yesware account because they didn't have a concept of Teams yet. So when I would set up all of their Gmail addresses, I would log into everyone's Gmail before their first day and like copy and paste these templates into their account and have them all there so they were ready. Sometimes they would disappear and we'd have to redo it. And like that's how this started, right? And that was a nightmare, man. But then they eventually added that team functionality where I, as the manager, could manage the templates, so I could make a
Yeah.
change and spit it out to the whole team, and that was like game changer. But then Sales Loft and Outreach came in, and it sort of poured fuel on that fire. And to your point, it's like something that works. It works until it gets overly saturated, I think, and then it just becomes
Exactly.
the status quo, and it equates to noise, basically.
Because before Yesware, you were just copy and pasting. You might have had like autocomplete or like hotkeys or something like
A
that.
Google Doc.
Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Totally. Copy and
yeah,
paste from a Google Doc.
yeah.
Then there was the mail merge. All right. They were like and this is what Carb was, but Sales Loft and Outreach, they basically brought the ability to automate that. And when you saw like when that technology came out, the first adopters got an absolutely massive boost.
Hmm.
But then the fundamental technology hasn't really changed
Yeah.
since then. And I'd argue in the last 2 years, with the advancements of AI coming out and the ability to scale up and like basically mail merge prompts using a tool called Clay, I think that's the kind of next. Uh, I feel like a douchebag saying alpha, but you can get kind of a alpha to compare to your competition if you're better at using a tool like Clay and scaling up these prompts. And so I think the demand gen tool set was largely stagnant for a very long period of time, and only recently have new tools come out that have become interesting. I would not include AI SDR in those tools. I think the AI SDR tools will be effective. They will be great at some point, but I think that we are asking too much of them, given like what large language models are really great at. And large language models are great at language. They are not great at looking at a database of contacts, understanding who your best customers are, and then finding all the little campaigns and threads to kind of pull out of there and say, okay, well, this customer segment is unique because X. And so we're going to email them this. And this customer segment is really unique because this. Oh, and these folks change jobs and these things do that. It's just we're not at a place, or I haven't seen anything where a generalized AI could come in and then generate all these plays, can look at the available signals and can appropriately select the most relevant contacts, even though that's what they promise to do with the lookalike audience. I just haven't actually seen any in practice that are outperforming just regular SDR teams. And I know the argument is, oh, but an AI SDR is, 4x cheaper. But I don't necessarily think that saving money is the goal of a revenue team. I think the goal of a revenue team, obviously it's got to be profitable, but you want to profitably acquire the maximum amount of customers. And an AI SDR is going to capture a smaller percentage of customers than a human SDR currently. Today, April 22, 2025. That I believe that statement is true. I'm sure it is not true in certain instances. I've seen a couple folks that have kind of kludged a few things together and they're getting very good results, but I haven't seen anything that's generalized. It's like a generalized AI SDR tool that is absolutely fantastic. Now, I think what that's doing to the industry is it's putting downward pricing pressure on pretty much anybody who's doing outsourced email. I also think that model is fundamentally broken, the outsourced SDR model, and it's actually why we shut down our outsourced SDR model earlier this year.
Okay. We're skipping ahead a little bit. Let me,
sorry.
And no, it's fine. It's fine. This is all good stuff. And I've got some thoughts on the AI SDR piece as well. Before we jump to that, I want to make sure, and we kind of touched on this, so maybe you don't have much more to add, but I just want to make sure I get your thoughts on what do you think's happening with growth at all cost? Is it, I'll sort of share my thoughts here to give you a sense and see if you agree or if you think something else going on. I've seen sort of a divergence, right? And I think COVID triggered a lot of this, but I also think that this cycle was probably due to happen anyway, because you kind of just can't keep pumping money into something endlessly. Like the volume of just crap that was in the market was becoming abundant, right? It was becoming kind of ridiculously easy. I don't want to make it, maybe that's the wrong word, but because I don't want to say it's ever easy to raise money and start a company, but it seemed like money was sort of just being thrown around a bit
I'll
easier
back you there.
than it should.
2021, 2022, in the beginning of 2022, it was easier. A good friend of mine raised $100 million off of $1 million in ARR.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
good on you if you can.
It's gambling for lack of a better word. And I know people don't like to hear that because there's strategy that goes into it, but there's also strategy that goes into poker and everything else. And I mean, the way I've looked at that model is like, if we're going to start a venture portfolio and our goal is, all right, we're going to raise some money and we're going to invest in, I don't know, 20 companies, right? And we just need one or two of them to crush it. And in order to get those one or two there, the mindset that they've adopted over time has been, we push all of them toward being a unicorn. They have to do all of sort of the same things, sort of hit the T2, D3, hire in abundance, raise money in these rounds, burn it at this rate. If you don't spend it and burn it fast enough, we're going to ask you why you're not using our money. Like that's kind of insane when you think about it. And I think the only reason that existed is you have to kind of look up higher in the economy, I think, and we're printing all of this money for so many years. And if you're constantly adding money into the system, there's usually some sort of a high level strategy on where they want that money to go. There's a purpose to it. And the purpose is to advance technology. It's a carrot on a stick. If you pour money into an industry, people are going to work hard. Everyone's going to want to be involved and we're going to become the leading country or whatever. And so I think that's the high level sort of notion of like plowing tons of money into an industry. but it has to sort of stop at a certain point, right? And we saw it with the dot-com bubble. I think we saw it with, the stock market before our time. And there's been a lot of that that's gone on. And then eventually something has to sort of reset a little bit. And maybe there's an outside sort of event that like kind of triggers that, which I think the pandemic had, a lot to do with that, push people to remote work at the same time that all this AI is coming out and allowing people to sort of like, maybe find better ways to run a company or whatnot. So anyway, so I think that sort of all of those things happening at once has created a bit of a divergence where newer companies entering the space are saying, hey, maybe we don't need to raise all this money. Maybe there's a different way we can do this. And then we don't have to worry about, meeting these ridiculous sales targets. We can kind of grow at our own pace and stuff like that. And maybe we're remote. We don't need the money for an office, all that stuff. But there's all these companies that already got their valuation bloated through the roof, and they have no choice really, unless they're going to take a down round and kind of, burn the money up that way. No one wants to ever do that. So I think we're at that point where there's a lot of companies that, hey, we've chosen this route and we have to go that route now. Aircall is definitely in that boat. And it's like, you kind of have to like rough out the tough time until things maybe pick back up, or you're kind of just stuck at this valuation, right? That like no one wants to liquidate at that point. So anyway, I went off a little bit too deep there, but curious to get your thoughts. Like, do you think is growth at all costs gone? Is it coming back? Is it sort of just, or do you agree with me? It's sort of, there's kind of these two different paths that you can take now.
I think growth at all costs was here in full force from, I don't know, 2012, maybe earlier to 2021.
Yeah.
It was kind of the richest bull market in venture capital.
Yeah, I'd say about 2010 to 2020, roughly.
Yeah. I think I follow David Scott pretty closely. And he doesn't post as much as he used to anymore, but he writes some fantastic content on forentrepreneurs.com. And in 2016, 2015, he wrote a post on, I think it was like SaaS metrics, or benchmarking SaaS metrics. Anyway, it was he was looking at the Pacific Crest survey in 2016. And the thing that struck me in 2016 was that the average venture-backed startup was spending 92 cents to acquire $1 of ARR. 92 cents in raw customer acquisition costs, not fundamental cost to deliver the service, not cost to run the company, not servers, not hiring, not just anything related to sales or marketing spend, including salaries. By 2021, that number had gotten up, I think it was over $2, and now it's come back down to
Which
around
number went
$1.60.
up?
The cost to acquire a customer.
The cost.
CAC to it's
So
not
the
CAC to
92
LTV.
cents went up to $2.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're spending $2 to acquire $1.
Yeah, they actually started. So Pacific Crest got bought by KeyBank, and then they
This is LTV over CAC, you're saying, right? Or
This is
slightly
basically
different?
this is slightly different. And they measure it slightly differently now, but it's basically the dollar value of like how much do you spend to acquire $1 of ARR is the question. And in 2016, it was 92 cents. In 2021, I think it peaked around $2. And now I believe it's back down to like 168 was the last number I saw. My numbers might be up or down a couple of cents because the way they're reporting it now is slightly different. So I had to do some back of the napkin math. And so I think just when you look at the venture capital industry, the way that their hits, the way that everything is structured with, 1 in 20 needs to pay back 100x return. I don't think the math can be any differently. I don't think there's some like large grand scheme of thing, grand plan. I just think that's how venture capital worked. And in 2010 to 2021, there was so much money going into it that when there's so much money coming into it, you're going to get you had your S tier investors in there, your A tier investors were already in there. And then there's all these folks that are like, oh, I could do that. So you get your B tier and your C tier and so on and so forth. And so I think we just saw it with so much money wanting to be in venture capital. I think we saw the tier list kind of expanding and filling up down below, lower and lower. And I think that's how you get these crazy valuations. I feel bad for it's hard to feel bad for somebody who raised $100 million on $1 million. But if I just look at the work that founder now has to do to grow into to 100 million in cash in the bank to grow into that valuation, it's a tremendous journey.
Yeah.
And
Because
so
if you
I
can't
do,
raise that next round, right? Like Aircall went up to, I want to say 1.1 billion valuation at their last, and I don't know details of what they're up to today, but I would imagine that raising another round at a higher valuation today is exponentially harder than it would have been like 5 years ago or whatnot. And so, yeah,
yeah.
you get stuck in a tight spot. And then IPOs are also tough. So that doesn't help much either today.
Totally. I mean, I run a podcast where I talk to founders about where their first customers come from, where they're, what channels are working for them. I can see that the tone and tenor of those conversations have certainly shifted. In the 2022 kind of era, it was caution, abundance of caution. It was, I'm conserving all my dry powder. I'm conserving all my ammunition. I'm trying to spend as little as I possibly can to make that needle move. I think 2024 is really when I started to see that attitude shift from specifically AI-backed companies or AI-based companies that were fundamentally kind of driven by this new model, where the attitude shifted. It was no longer, I'm a SaaS company that I'm just trying to, get some customers. It's, I'm potentially looking at a winner-take-all market. And an AI-based business model is a fundamentally lower margin business model because you have to pay for the LLMs, at least right now. And I think those are a big chunk. And so I think this new breed of companies requires more cash, requires to grow at a little bit faster pace. And when you grow faster, the cash flow trough gets deeper. And so you're going to need to burn more cash. So I think we saw a little bit of a respite from it in maybe from 22, 20 to 24. But I do see that attitudes coming back, not quite with I remember talking to one company, they're fairly large, but they're like, I want 100 SDRs outsourced. I'm like, why don't you hire 100 SDRs? They're like, oh, we can't hire that many. I'm like, why? Like I think I had 75 SDRs at the time. I'm like, why do you think it would be a better experience for me to go and hire 75 SDRs? I don't have 75. I have 75 SDRs now. I don't have 75 SDRs sitting around waiting for a customer. That would be insanity. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, but you can hire. I'm like, yeah, I can, but so can you. Like, I just don't understand how the math is going
You
to
think
work
it's just
out better
laziness?
here.
Like they just want to keep their hands out of the troubles of it? Is that really the root of it?
I think I think there's a couple of reasons. I don't think you can say it's one or the other specifically. I do think in some it was a lack of knowledge and understanding of like how to properly do it. There's that you ever have to like change a light switch in your house and you're like, I know it's just two wires. And I'm pretty confident I turn the breaker off and I can touch the terminals with my multimeter and that the power shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And that even though I've tested with the multimeter, I'm still nervous the first time I touch that wire.
Yeah.
When you don't know, you haven't done something before, there's a little bit of complexity. You want to so I see people hesitating to make these decisions because they just don't know how it's going to work out. And then I see, especially in larger companies, I see a lot of like cover my ass behavior. And I think that drove a lot of business in the outbound industry where a CEO would read predictable revenue. They'd go to their VP of sales and say, hey, I want this. And the VP of sales would go, I don't know how to do this. So they go find an outsourced vendor. They'd spend 6 months with that vendor. They'd say, look, it doesn't work. They produced one customer in 6 months. Outbound doesn't work for us. And so they could cover their ass when it didn't work. Versus
Yeah.
had they gone to the build it internally route, they would have had to spend 3x the amount of money. They would have had to hire 2 SDRs and a leader, or the person would have had to be the leader themselves. They would have had to find the right tech and tools. They would have had to figure out the right process. They would have had to find the right data sources. They would have had to stitch it all together, right? I did the math a couple of years ago, and it's like a $550,000 minimum investment for a basic SDR team of 2 just to get it going. Now, you'd be foolish just to stop at 2 because once you've got all these sunk costs and the process and the tech and the tools, it's really easy to add 2, 3, 4 SDRs. But the thing you look at is the first 6 months, 12 months of an SDR team are mathematically the worst months that team is ever going to produce. And I
It
think
compounds.
too many companies.
The success really does compound. Yeah.
Yeah. I lend
How
you
many times have you
$100
seen
at 20% interest. And it's going to be the amount you're going to get from me in the first 6 months is nothing, but we keep that rolling for 20 years and it's pretty fantastic. And I think it's the same with an SDR team. You have, but it's almost worse because you have to invest so much and you have to take a big risk, and that's a huge political risk.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to mess up too. Like, I think you're going to hire the wrong leader once, or you're going to maybe hire a group of people that don't work out, or you're going to try a process that just isn't good. Like, you have to be willing to make those failures. And I would imagine even on the outsourcing side, you need that flexibility too. Right. And they probably don't expect that. Like, well, you're the expert. We hired you to be there. I'm not the expert on your company. I'm not the expert on running an outbound play for your company. I have to become that. Right. And that takes time for me to get a team there. I would imagine it's not much different. Right.
Yep. Yeah. And I think especially when you're outsourced, you're less likely to have an executive sponsor. And we're somebody who has the stick-to-itiveness to say, yeah, this isn't producing great results in the first 6 months. And yeah, it was a little bit delayed, but we're going to keep going. Like the one of the reasons why, and I'd probably say the biggest reason why we shut down our outsourcing was I was tired of having the 7-month churn conversation or 8-month or 9-month churn conversation where we had just gotten the model to a point of repetitiveness. Right? Like, you do all the testing, you do all you get all that failure under your belt, and then it starts to show that it's repeating. And you're like, guys, we've made it. Like, let's celebrate. And the customer's like, yeah, but it took you too long, so we're going to churn. You're like, but it's here now. Like, all you have to do is keep going, and it's going to continue to produce a deal every other month, a deal every month. Like, you built this whole system. You spent 7 months building a professional race car, and then you drive the race car around the track for the first time, and you're like, wow, what a great car, but I'm going to throw it in the garbage because it took you 7 months instead of 4 months, even though you told me it was going to take 7 or probably 12 or probably 18 or 24 to build. And so that's the reason we shut our outsourcing program down. It feels like a scam when it feels like you're selling a scam when the product, the thing that you need, that the customer needs to buy, takes 12 months, but companies only want to pay for the first 3 to 6 months. And you're like, I can't justify doing that anymore. Even though in every sales process, I say, this is what's going to happen. These are the benchmarks. It's going to take 12, 24 months. And what do people do? They give it 6 months. They're like, it hasn't produced any revenue. And I'm like, I showed you the fucking math that said it wasn't going to. These are the benchmarks to look for.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, sorry. And just for anybody who's listening, the math that I've got a sheet I'm happy to share with anybody that reaches out to me. Basically, it takes you 30 days to go from sequenced to booked a meeting, right? And then it takes you, call it 60 days to close an outbound deal, right? There's 3 months right there. Then it takes you an additional, say, 30 days to ramp, maybe 90 days to ramp an SDR. And suddenly you're at the 6-month mark.
Yeah.
Even if your first campaigns and sequences are the perfect ones, which they never are, you just have to go and test and test and test. And so this is the math that I'm thinking of. It's not that it's not working. It's just working slowly.
This reminds me of, this isn't really drastically different, or maybe very much the same as building it in-house, in the sense that, at AirCall, there was even another challenge that we had to deal with there. You've probably dealt with this with some of your clients in the past. So we start building the outbound team, start building that motion. They had it going on a small scale before I started there. So the wheels were already turning. But when we started scaling it, and I brought in Brian Elsesser, to lead that up, the challenge. I
didn't know you guys worked together at AirCall. That's cool. I love Brian.
Yeah, I recruited Brian from where was he at? eMarketer, I think. Brian was.
Yeah.
Brian was the recruit that out of the 300 plus people I've ever hired, I put more effort into trying to recruit him than anyone, trying to convince him to come. Like, we fell in love with him. The team loved him, everything. And we bent over backwards to get him there because he wasn't looking to leave. Like, it was an outbound poach. I forget even how I heard about him or whatnot. But yeah, it was, he was phenomenal. And the big challenge that we had really came down to time. There was the LTV over CAC factor because we were selling smaller deals and we had to start pushing for larger deals to make that work. some of that was just product constraints, so we weren't necessarily too worried about that because we'd be, able to close those larger deals over time. But the bigger problem for us was that selling a phone system, people were in long-term contracts for these tools. And so we could run a great SDR motion, make contact. They can agree they hate their phone system. They could agree they want to test something new, but they're like, we're stuck in this thing for 3 years or for another 6 months or 12 or whatever. And so we had a lot of like follow back dates. And then we started testing with like buying them out of contracts or like different things that we could do to make it work. But we can only spend so much to buy them out of a contract. If they're in 3 years and like they can't get out of it, we're not going to buy you out. We're going to lose way too much money, right? But so we had like a limit. If they were like within 6 months of expiration, we would credit that amount, toward their account and whatnot. And so, but nonetheless, what that basically meant is like for the first year of him running this team, he's building up all of these great touch points that we can reach back out to, all of these great follow-up dates. We know when their contracts are going to expire. Like we have this arsenal now that we know is going to be money over the next few years. But you have all this pressure coming from VCs. They're like, well, it's not moving fast enough. And it's like, we're telling you why. We're telling you there's no one.
What the hell do you know about?
Yeah, like no one can change the facts that we're telling you. No one.
Yeah.
But yeah,
totally.
so it's, yeah.
I just wanted to highlight what you said there because the knowing when to follow up next, knowing what you need to do, what needs to change. This is the pot of gold that I think so many people that start an SDR team and then walk away from it don't understand that they're missing out on. The first most frustrating conversation I have is a company that churns at month 7. And they're like, I just got going. And I'm like, you idiots, like you did the thing. Like we just did the thing. We climbed the fucking mountain, pardon my French. And like you got there. And they're like, nah. The second most frustrating conversation is the company that we have too many companies that have churned and then come back 2 years later and be like, you'll never believe how many deals we closed from outbound. I'm like, yeah, I fucking will. I walked you through the math 2 years ago. Bingo. They're like, yeah, you were right. And they're like, okay, let's do a pilot again. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to go through this cycle again. This is dumb. You either commit or we don't do it. I've seen it so many times with SDR managers. They get fired, they leave. The next person comes in who maybe isn't even as good, but they reap the benefits of all those thousands or millions of emails and phone calls and data points that have been collected. They now have that arsenal of all these callback dates and everything. Because everybody wants intent data, but you can't generate real intent data. I wrote a post the other day. I said the cold call is the best data source. Talk 100%. To them. Collect real data. You're generating your own internal intent data by every great SDR conversation you have with a prospect, as long as you're tracking it and saving it somewhere. Yes. And somebody is going to action on that. And I think this is one of the biggest things that even companies ramp their SDR teams that have SDR teams that they'll do is the discrepancy between what sales development wants and what sales wants or what marketing wants. And you get these deals where it's the right person at the right company and they have pain, but it's not a priority in the next 90 days. So sales doesn't want to touch it. They're like, nah, it's not a good one. The AEs reject it. And you're like, you lazy bastards, just do your work and like put them in a nurture. And they're like, nah, no project in the next 90 days. I've got all this pressure. Why should I prioritize something like that? And you're like, because it's money for you next quarter. Yeah. Like this is the value that so many companies are just throwing away. Yes. You actually have to do work. Yeah. Yes. My teacher in college used to refer to this as sales. Like this is what a salesperson does. If customers just come to you and buy, you're not a salesperson, you're an order taker. Yeah. And like you may as well be standing there with a clipboard and your headset on and just like taking orders, right? Like anybody can do that. Yeah. You need to get in early, you need to work, you need to ask questions and keep in touch with them in an intelligent way. Anyway, I think this is one of the biggest things where companies lose a lot of money. I rant and ramble about it. I got a book coming out in October, and one of the sections in it is called the 4 funnels, and it basically highlights the nurture category, the nurture funnel, as one of the most important funnels in any demand gen system. It's like meet, disco, manage, nurture, and nurture is the hero because these are the conversations from the people that actually get it, the people that have actually built sales development teams. Anybody will tell you these nurture conversations are the single most valuable thing because it'll double the results of your sales development team if you manage them properly.
I completely agree. I want to ask you, I'm going to throw in a little extra question here just 'cause I want to be able to give this advice. What's the right answer? How much time should someone set aside? Is it a 2, 3 year project? I mean, I go on the high end. I say if you want to build an SDR team, like plan on being in this game for 5 years. Like just don't plan on seeing some crazy like result in 90 days or 9 months. Like you have to
Mhm.
give it a chance, right? It's like raising a child.
Yeah.
If you can't stand your child's a pain in the ass at age 5, you don't just walk away, right? Like the learning compounds over time.
I mean, I got 2 7-year-olds and I've thought about it a couple of times. That's a topic for a different podcast. I mean, I think the absolute minimum that somebody should think about is 2 years, right?
Okay.
You need to hire, and I think the minimum SDR team, in my opinion, and I've got to check this with Lars Nilsson, who I think we could all agree is one of the godfathers of sales development, has built the largest, most successful sales development teams at both Cloudera and Snowflake. And so two absolutely behemoth sales development teams. And I think he and I agree that two SDRs is the way to start, and a manager, especially if you're a CEO, you've got a VP of sales that has, a full plate of folks that they're managing already. This is sales development isn't a department you can build off the side of your desk. It requires a manager's full-time focus for at least 3 months to get all that up and running. And so let's just do the math. It takes you how long to hire that sales leader, right? Call it 3 months. Then it takes you another 3 months to hire two SDRs. I'm sure you could do it faster, but I'm trying to give
Sometimes it
something
takes
that,
longer to find the manager, especially could take longer. Although
if you're
nowadays there's
picky.
so many of them in the market. Yeah, if you're picky for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly that is definitely true. In 10 years ago, like we didn't hire any SDR that had any experience because there weren't any. You had to hire the person that worked in the bar below you and train them how to be an SDR. I still think that's a great
Which I
hire.
would argue wasn't as big of a deal back then, but now they got to learn Clay. They got to learn all these crazy tools. It's like there's actually a lot of value in hiring someone with some experience today. Although I have always preferred entry level hires just because you can mold them, you can train them from scratch. But yeah, if you're trying to bring people in who really understand how to use all these tools, you can save a lot of time by going with someone experienced.
I'll put a pin in the Clay SDR piece because I love Clay. But I want to finish about the timeline. So like we're at 6 months just to get the team hired, right? That is, and also the reason we say hire two is if one of those SDRs leaves, which like the SDR is a hard role and some people don't like it. And so you want to, yeah, like there's nothing worse than having a manager having all of the tech stack. 2 months in, your SDR is like, you know what? I don't like this role. Now you've lost all your progress. You've lost all your momentum because you didn't want to add the risk of like one of the smallest value hires, lowest dollar value hires in the whole model, right? Now that like that's a single point of failure that's put you another 3 months behind. So that's why we say hire two plus a manager. That's 6 months just to get that team hired. It's probably the manager has probably figured out some of the systems and process, but from that 6 month mark, now you're another 6 months before you close a deal. But before you close your first deal, assuming you've got a 30 to 60 day average sales cycle and a medium size kind of call it, I don't know, 20K to 100K deal, right? Like that's kind of the rough math is you're not going to get a closed deal in the first year. And then in year two, you're probably going to get a deal every other month. And then in year three, you're going to start to see a deal every month. And like that's the rough math of how all the averages break down. Like I said, I got a model that maths this all out. It's not pretty, but it works. If you reach out, I'm happy to share, or maybe I could share it. It's an ugly Google sheet. We could throw a link in the show notes or something.
Yeah, if you want to share it, we can drop it in there. I think that
But
sounds accurate too. Like, and you're not going as like I'm going, I guess, very conservative by saying 3 to 5 years, but
yeah,
under promise, over deliver. But yeah, I mean, realistically speaking, I think telling someone a 2 year timeline is good because you can potentially get results faster. But you don't want to benchmark yourself on anything like under 2 years. It's just crazy. Yeah, you're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna have problems. You're gonna have things you don't expect.
and ideally you would have 2 months of full time running the program full time. So really, my answer is 2.5 years because you need 6 months to ramp it up, and then you need 2 full years of ramping it because that first year is going to be, like you said, all those first touches, mapping the market, finding out when people are making decisions, who the right folks are. The second year is the first opportunity where your SDR team has both a full cold sequence that's working and running and a full nurture sequence of contacts and folks that they can follow up with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they were, the folks that they reached out to initially. Chances are you've cycled through SDRs at that stage. But as long as the data is tracked and stored, you have two streams of meetings, your cold meetings and your nurture meetings. And you don't get that. You want to measure the program on a full year of having both of those streams available to you. So I would say the right answer is 2.5 years.
That makes sense. And would you say if they're pushing to do something faster, but maybe they want to hire more people, would your response to that be like, let's go slower with fewer people. You can have essentially the same budget, but let's take our time. Let's do 2 SDRs instead of jumping into hiring 10 or 20.
I'm going to butcher the analogy, but the 9 women can't have a baby in 1 month, right? Like certain things just have to be done sequentially. And so I'd say the minimum and the maximum for your initial SDR team is 2 SDRs, because you need to learn, to facilitate all that learning, to figure out what is the right messaging, what is the right script. I've seen teams do this with 10 SDRs, and what you have is 2 all-stars that are just crushing it, and 8 people that are like, the hell are we doing here?
Yes.
Right? Like nothing's working, because you need to have these highly motivated, the Brian Elsessers of the world, not the 9 out of 10 other folks that are not quite as crazy, and I mean crazy in the nicest, greatest possible way about Brian. He's amazing and a little bit crazy. I think we all are.
He's nuts.
Would do something
the guy's got
that.
like 7 jobs. He's like a paramedic, a firefighter. He's got like 12 kids. He's all over the place. He's a maniac.
I think he was also Doogie Howser. Yeah. He was also a doctor in high school. Like crazy.
Oh, he's an opera singer too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just all actually. Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me
so,
even a little bit.
Or no, sorry, he did Broadway. That's what it was. Yeah.
Broadway. He probably also
he
writes for Taylor Swift.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, you would never believe one human does all the things that he does.
You could tell me literally anything, and I'd be like, yeah, that checks. I could see that happening. We'll have to send him this. Like, we're just crushing on Brian at this stage. But like, you need one of those SDRs who can help build all this out, right? You need one of those that can help figure the things out. But 10 SDRs figuring this out doesn't make for a better experience. It makes for a significantly worse experience, because within that group, you're going to have a couple SDRs that are disgruntled that we don't have all the process, right? Like if you think about the type of SDR you need that starter, right? And those folks are really great for the first 2 years of an SDR team. Yeah. And then if Brian is your SDR at 2 years, you need to fire that guy so hard, because he's just going to stir up the shit. You need him out and into a new role where he's starting something new. And then you need to bring in all the folks that would be awful first hires in an SDR program that just want the process, they want the playbook, and they want to just turn the crank and hit repeat. And those folks are where you build the kind of bedrock of your SDR team. But you need a crazy person like Brian, or probably Collin to get that started. But I guarantee you, I'd be a great SDR for the first 3 to 6 months, and then your worst SDR for the next, however long I was an SDR for. I know, because I was in those roles, and I was the best first year salesperson ever, and then almost getting fired the second year because I was just bored. And there are builders and there are folks that turn the crank, and you need one of those in the early days, not 10 of those, because they're hard to find. You get 10 of those, I mean, it'd probably be fun, but it would be crazy. But chances are you got 1 or 2 builders, and then you got 9 or 10 folks that can turn the crank. And so no, yes, you can hire more, but no, it won't make it go faster.
What you just described is almost identical to what I walked into at AirCall when they opened up their New York office. When I was first hired, the VP of marketing was sort of interim managing the sales team. And they had about 10 people in the office. 3 of them were AEs. I want to say one of the AEs had sort of just become an AE. So there were sort of 2 senior guys on the team. And then the rest there were like 8 or 9 sort of, or roughly speaking, maybe 7 or 8 SDRs. And a couple of them were really strong, and the rest of them were just kind of trying to figure it out. A few of them were really frustrated. It was what you just described, like to the T. And a lot of like what I had to do initially is I came in empty-handed, like it was just me, and I'm trying to figure out the sales process, learn the product, all this sort of stuff. And meanwhile, I have all these SDRs who have no manager, they have nothing. And so I had to figure out like a way to deal with that sort of temporarily and then long term. The long term fix was Brian. The temporary fix was sort of pairing them up in buddy systems by taking like one who was sort of on the senior end doing better and pairing them up with someone who wasn't, and kind of
Mhm.
working in that way and allowing them to essentially manage the team themselves while I was able to sort of zoom out and kind of figure out the long term plan. And it worked actually really well.
Mhm.
It helped. It was not a long term solution, but it helped at least to get things going because they had already
I,
made the hires, and I didn't want to just fire people for the sake of firing them. So we did a little sort of peer to peer kind of mentorship type program, and that helped. It was good, but it was not a long term solution.
I think an important thing that you did there was kind of give yourself some time and space to figure out what is the right direction for this
Yeah.
team to go.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I see a lot of founders, a mistake they make is rushing speed to market. You know, they've got a product, they've sold a couple, and they're like, I've got to grow as fast as I can. I got to hire as many SDRs as I can. I've got to move. And I'm like, but if you don't know that you're going in the right direction, it doesn't matter how quickly you get there, right? If we are sailing, and if you need to sail 100 miles in that direction, but we're facing this way, like that's not going to help at all. You
Yeah.
need to figure out the right direction first. And that's the process, the customers, which markets. Can we go up market? Because everybody wants to go up market, but just because you want to go up market doesn't mean your product will support that motion.
Yeah.
And like your poor SDRs that got to go fight up market or got to go fight. Like I remember in the early days, there was a couple SDRs at Hootsuite was a huge company here in Vancouver. And there was two SDRs that I knew, and one was just rolling in dough because they had the market. They were the best SDR in the whole company. And I remember I knew another guy who I thought was on par or maybe like a slight like 4% edge. And this guy was like almost on a pip because he was just in a terrible market. And
Hmm.
you're like, this SDR isn't magically golden because they just have the great market. And so figuring out where the great markets are, where the real great need is versus that poor SDR that has to open up a new market, those two SDRs should be measured very differently. And when you walk into a team, you're like, what direction are we pointing? Where
Yeah.
are the good markets? What have we talked to product at all about like what we're serving and the direction we're going? And so it's very rare that a product team has ever actually sat down with a demand gen team like a sales development team to say, here's all the people we talked to. Here's what we learned from them. Here's where the gap is. This is why they buy AirCall. And like that is such powerful information for a sales team to have. But
Yeah.
in I've only seen it maybe twice. And I've talked to probably thousands of entrepreneurs about building sales development teams, and only two times has it ever come up that, oh yeah, we have our product team deeply embedded with our sales and revenue team. I'm like,
Hmm.
that's amazing, but it never happens. And so you're left with hiring a guy like Collin to come in and be like, okay, now I got to figure out where to go. Where I guarantee everybody, like there was a product team, there was a product manager, maybe even the CEO that knew all of this stuff, but the
Yeah.
SDRs didn't.
Yeah. I'm seeing I think there's a lot that needs to change in that regard. And I think a lot of companies are starting to figure this out. Like Slack was way ahead of the curve with sort of like obsessing with the customer acquisition process as a part of the product design itself. And
Mhm.
so like the way I've explained this, I think when SaaS sort of first took off, everyone was basically building a solution to a problem for the first time. And so you just solve that problem. Kind of doesn't even matter if you do it perfectly because you're the only one doing it and it's way better than the status quo. And so there was a huge like just explosion of selling those types of tools. But over time it's become hyper competitive, right? And everyone's trying to get like every little detail right. And so it's just like, yeah, I mean, you to go back for a second too, I wanted to say like you talked about sort of taking the time to get everything in the right order, right? Before kind of going. And it reminds me of two different things. One was like foods class in high school when they teach you about mise en place. I don't know if you've ever heard that French term,
Mhm.
mise en place, but it essentially means like taking the time to set everything up that you're going to need in the order in which you will need it, right? So you're not taking cooked meat over raw meat and sort of your knives are all in the right row and you can move in this nice sort of production line, right? And they're doing construction on the outside of my building. I saw them do the same thing. They showed up a week before the project started and they started staging equipment outside, storage units, all this stuff. They're measuring stuff, they're planning. And I had thought they were on day one, they were just going to start like ripping the walls down and, doing, changing the windows, changing the side. But no, they're out there for like a week, like strategically staging everything. So when they came to do the job, it was like precision, And I think it's very much the same with building these sales teams. So to your point, start with the two at least. And it's the same thing with AEs. Don't hire just one, right? Always start with them. All right, this next piece, we've already touched a bit on it. So I got your thoughts on AI, but I want to go maybe a little deeper and just see what you think is going to happen there. I'll share with you my thoughts here. And this is, I'm talking about, I think there's AI in sales, like what's going to happen with AI in sales. But I think AI SDR is really the topic today because I don't think we're at a realm of like necessarily talking about fully replacing salespeople with AI today. I think that's probably more, it's more just like improvements to self-serve that will essentially do that over time, necessarily, rather than like an AI actual salesperson. I think it's more likely that you'll just, the sign up flow will just be so easy that you may not need one in many instances. But when it comes to AI SDR, so I've been trying to understand this for a while because on one hand, I'm like, okay, this seems to make a lot of sense because I can tell you as a person who's led SDR teams, like once you figure it out, it's very much like, how do I get people to keep replicating this, right? And not deviate from like what we know works and all that sort of stuff. And so on that one hand, I'm like, well, programming in AI makes a lot of sense there because you can sort of fine tune it over time and it won't make the same mistakes and all that sort of stuff. And so if you're in a transactional environment where you have a very repetitive, proven process, that's where I think the low-hanging fruit is for these tools today. I don't necessarily think that they're like acing it out of the park yet. And I partnered with AI SDR to learn because I want to know like what is happening here. And I'm tired of hearing people speculate and all this stuff because I do think that a lot of us just speak with emotion or whatever. But so what I've learned so far, and I actually posted about it today because I've been doing some monthly dive-ins with them, but it sounds like, I mean, but first of all, there's different companies doing it, and they all seem to be taking slightly different approaches. Although, if you look at some of the controversies going on, it seems like the market and the craziness is pushing them toward the same concept, which is really what Yuri's been saying, at least since I interviewed him on this podcast a few months ago, which is like, number one, like this is not for everyone, right? Like you cannot use this tool to figure out outbound. And for the same reasons that we just talked about, right? Like it's a multi-year process. It's very convoluted. And the idea with AI, as I understand it, is you want to be able to program it to do something. In order to do that, you need to know how to do it. Right. And so you can't take a cookie cutter model for the same reason I can't take this SDR playbook that worked at one company and just go train it to another. They're going to need to figure out the nitty gritty details. And so I think where we're at today is like a very, very early stage of that. I think who it might work for today and who they're starting to show some signs of it working for is very predictable, very repeatable, very proven transactional processes where, just you can literally almost essentially rubber stamp and duplicate some of those motions, right? Because there's so much volume. Will quality maybe go down a little bit? Sure. But there's probably some other areas where you can make up for it by more volume, by them working 24 hours a day, by them not taking vacations, or the cost is just lower. So I think there's an area of that world today where like it can probably work. It's probably hyper transactional. It's probably not at all the types of teams that we've been working on. But I do think that over time, these things should get smarter and start to ease their way into that world. But I do not think, and I feel very confident in saying this now, I don't think it's a full replacement of SDRs. Now, that's a little bit of semantics because like I'm saying full replacement would mean you don't need to hire any, and every team in the world their SDRs are just eliminated. They're gone. They're toast. They're not needed. And I don't think that that's the case. In the same way that you go to the grocery stores and people said self-checkout will replace cashiers, but they didn't. They added them in addition to, right, to help with a certain abundance of work. And so I think it's actually quite the same. But there will be phases to this evolution and lots of learning and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, do you have anything you want to add? I know you dove in on that a little bit, but do you have any further thoughts there on what you think is going on there?
I would not have as much of a problem with it if we called it AI cold email. Because like that's all it can do
statement
right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like it can't AI SDR, it can't AI SDR leader, it can't AI figure out. And to your point that I think you said, AI SDR, the company said is this isn't a tool that can figure out your initial go-to-market. It cannot figure out a sales development program for you. And
Reality
I
is, it
think
probably could, but it would be stupid to try. Because you can iterate
it
faster with a human, right? Like,
it absolutely could, but it would nuke the market, right?
yes,
Like
yes,
one of the best things you can do is start small and test and like slowly work it out.
yes,
But with AI SDR, because the conversion rates are so much lower, you need to have such a high volume, which means you basically, in order to figure it out, you need to touch the entire market with
yeah,
messaging.
yeah.
And when you do that, you lower your reply rates for your second touch.
Hmm.
And so the
Which
human
is why they
element of
use
going
burner emails and stuff.
totally. But I mean, you still,
I'm not
when
saying
you're
that's a
seeing
good reason. That's like a temporary
no,
solution to a big problem. Yeah.
totally. And like, even still, right? Like if it's reaching out, if it's predictable revenue mail or get predictable revenue, like you're still seeing a brand reach out to you about this pain point, right? And it
Yeah.
kind of, you lose I think the, it's sort of like the buttermilk making process is like that very first skim off the top is like literally the cream. It's all the best stuff. And I think your first pass at a market, you want to have it really, really dialed in because that's where your best reply rates are going to come from. And wasting that by letting an AI SDR figure it out by just like nuking your entire market, I think is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of the AI SDR companies would argue is or would agree with. To
I know
you
he
know,
does. He definitely does. And I think, what was it, 11X or was it Artisan? There's the two. I forget which one was. I mean, Artisan's the one that's been like very real aggressive marketing against like don't hire humans. And I think they're just
mhm,
looking for some shock factor there. But was it 11X that had some sort of chaos going on there? I forget
in
exactly what.
TechCrunch and stuff recently.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, what they did is they seized the moment in terms of how willing people are to try this tool because everyone's desperate for pipeline. And so, and that's what Yuri says, like, it's like about qualifying people out. Like we could just be signing millions of people up, but we will have the worst churn like ever known to SaaS or AI, right? And he knows that. And so the game for him
Mhm,
is like, let's find the people that this works for today. And it's probably a narrow scope, but I think
mhm,
there's still the need, right? And so if we can over time the quality can get better and stuff is probably still a big question mark. I think it will,
mhm,
but how much better and where that, sort of where in the market it'll be able to supplement AIs on the more complex side is to be questioned. But there's still a massive world of sales today where they've
mhm,
proven outbound to work, but they just can't make the cost structure work, right? Because deal sizes are small or volume so high. And so in those areas, like I think if you're running a game of just like you send out a bunch of emails and it's working, but you're paying
mhm.
humans through the nose to do it, like, well, okay, it probably makes sense to play around and maybe quality goes down 1%, but your cost goes down 90%. And like, well, you're in a pretty good
But if
world.
you're
And
doing it right, let's just park here for a minute because I agree with you. I think the AI SDRs aren't competing with actual SDRs. They're
mm,
competing with outsourced email providers like the company I was running.
sure.
And so but I think if you're doing it right, because if you have an AI or if you have an email only motion in a huge market, those SDRs are probably not making dials, right? If you've got
Mm,
SDRs making dials into an absolutely massive market where email is the only profitable channel, that's not something. If dials work, and AI SDR isn't going to replace that. And so the
mhm,
only place where we can have an AI SDR versus a real SDR is cold email. But
mhm,
I still don't think you get much out of the AI SDR in that specific market. And specifically, we're talking about big market where email works and you've got it dialed in. That you're an SDR is going to, you could probably have one SDR handling, I don't know, most of the email replies, right? Like that's going to be the bottleneck in human time is managing the replies. You could probably have a fairly large campaign, call it 100 inboxes going at like a reasonable volume for one SDR. And one SDR could probably still manage, the replies, scheduling the follow-ups, et cetera, et cetera. That's the piece that we're competing against. That employee is going to cost you, I don't know, 50 to 100 grand a year, depending on where you're at. That AI SDR at that scale is probably going to cost you a couple of grand. So at most, you're saving 50%. and you're optimizing something that you've already invested all that time upfront in optimizing. So I agree with you. There is potentially a cost savings. I suspect the thing that I haven't seen AI SDR be able to do, and I haven't dug specifically into this, so I'll throw this question back to you. Can an AI SDR, or have you seen any AI SDR that takes those conversations where somebody says, hey, not ready now, maybe, let's touch base in November, and actually intelligently flags those to follow up with them in November? Or does it just kind of leave it? Because
It's a
everything
good
I've seen
question.
just does the blast.
I don't
I
know the
haven't seen any.
answer, but I will find out. Yeah, that's a great
That's the
question.
only use case that I think would produce a potentially a higher quality output than, or yeah, higher quality output than having a human. Because
Because humans
I
fail
don't,
at that a lot of the time. Even when you put the reminder in, half the time they're not even in the role anymore by the time it comes
it's,
around.
yeah, it's just mechanically risky. Like even
Yeah,
if you got everything tracked in your sequencer, having the next person start up, I mean, you can, like if specifically, if you're going 100% email, you could just have subsequences and
sure.
subsequences, and you could have all this automated. And so you've got one person and all they do is like answer replies and put them in the correct subsequence. The AI SDR is probably not going to do a much better job at that, but it'll do it cheaper.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. Okay, so what do you think the future of the SDR role looks like?
I think it's Iron Man. I've been saying this for a while, but I think to your point, I don't think we're gonna, when the printing press was invented, everybody thought everything's over. And it's like, well, it turns out those scribes just, the people that were like manually transposing books, they didn't have a job, but there was a shit ton more people required to operate the printing presses and then the warehouses, and like technology creates new jobs. It is deflationary in terms of, yeah, I think largely technology innovation is deflationary. Look at what the cost of a gigabyte was back when you and I had our first computer, or when you and I had our first phone that had a camera on it. You probably paid a pretty good amount for anything that had a decent camera, and now you can get a very, very good camera and
And then we
very.
never used them because the photos were terrible, right?
We found my wife's phone, like her old Motorola flip phone from
Yeah.
a long time ago.
The
And it had some
razor?
old text messages. Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
was pink. She was fancy.
Oh, pink
It had
razor.
text messages and these pictures. We're like, where is this picture? And she probably paid, the net cost of that phone was probably $600 back then.
Yeah.
And like you adjust for inflation, you're up to the cost of a new smartphone, but you're getting so much more. And so like I'd argue that innovation is deflationary, and so you're going to get so much more for your investment in the future. And I think from what I've seen of the technologies, you're still going to require a human. And I think even if you look just at AI SDR, to be an SDR, a real SDR, you need to call, email, LinkedIn. You don't have to do all those things because some people's markets don't
It depends
respond
on
to
the
those
market.
channels. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying if you're an SDR and you don't do that, you're not a real SDR, but I'm saying like a full general SDR is going to be able to do those three things. And I don't think AI will ever be allowed in the US to make these cold calls because
Yep.
there's legislation in there that says you can't. And so I think it's hamstrung by legislation. I do think it's a good thing. I'm the kind of person that anytime I get to that like customer service phone system, I don't even listen to the prompts. I just mash 0 100 times because I don't want to talk to like customer support, customer support. Like I don't want to
It's
go
the
through that.
ultimate test of can you control your temper is dealing with
A
that.
hundred, a
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
The two times I lose my temper are like in traffic or dealing with one of those phone
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah.
And my kids know that. They're like, let's give dad some space. We'll go read
Yeah.
a book. And
I've I've
I
learned to just like I used to feed into that rage on those. I would curse at them, and then I've finally learned over years. I'm like, what am I doing to myself, man? Like, calm down, like, chill. There's no one even listening to you getting this mad right now,
Yeah,
but
all you
it
got to do
does
is
it.
button
Yeah,
mash 0 and it
yeah,
works
yeah,
like half the time. So I just always button mash 0 and I skip all that and I'm like, get me to a human
yeah.
because I want to talk to a human. I don't want to talk to an AI. I don't want
Unless
to
the
go
AI
up
was super
against,
smart, though. Like, if it could
but
address
if
all your questions, I think in the future we get to a place where we want to talk to AIs. I do think that for the
for
same
some
reason that
things,
if like it depends how good it gets though. Like if you're getting ridiculously accurate and unbiased answers in the flash of a second, there would be zero value in talking to a human at that point. Now, I'm just talking about high level. And look, I think it's already happening, right? I mean, we used to ask people for directions on how to get somewhere. Then they came out with MapQuest. And there were people, if you remember, who didn't trust MapQuest. They're like, no, 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 I'm writing down, tell me how to get there. No one does that anymore. You go to Google Maps. The trust factor has evolved to that point. And I think we're seeing that with ChatGPT now. Like, you know, it used to be if I got into a debate with my friends on a topic, we would like pick a teacher and we're going to go ask them. They're the source of truth, you know, to break the debate. But now it's like you're breaking out ChatGPT for the most part. You're trusting it. Maybe you'll check the source. But like, I think that trust factor is something that gradually improves over time. And, you know, it's probably no different than any other piece of technology. Like, did people trust calculators when they first came out? I bet they made mistakes in the beginning. I bet you had to double check the work. Now, you don't even think about it. You just use it because it works and you believe it works. And maybe it could be wrong and you wouldn't even know because you trust it so much. So I do think that like time will evolve us there. I don't know how long that takes per se, but yeah, I do think there's an element of that. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And the SDR
just think about
role,
the next time you're calling into Comcast or Verizon or whoever your cell phone provider is, and you've got an issue, and you know that you need to negotiate and get them down to like not charge you for this thing. Do you want to speak to a human who's going to have some emotion and empathy, and you're going to be able to like actually have a conversation with them, or do you want to go up against an AI that Comcast or Verizon or AT&T programmed to like not give you the refund, but talk to you and diffuse the situation? I specifically don't want that in this type of situation. And I think that's where AI is going to be deployed. I 100% agree we're going to get to that point. But I still struggle to see the desire to, I think people like to buy from people. I don't think I'd like to insert in some circumstances.
I will challenge you on that though, because if that were true, salespeople wouldn't be the most hated people. We wouldn't be the most ignored people. We wouldn't be the people who get hung up on every time we make a cold call. And the statistics are showing this was five plus years ago, 2019. It was Gardner who said B2B buyers are going 80% of the way through the sales journey without speaking to a salesperson because they don't want to. So I would argue with people say that they like to buy from humans. I think there's an element of that. I'm with you. Like there's certainly like when technology is just inaccurate or too slow or not right, I think of course we would rather a human. But the notion that people want to be sold by salespeople, I think is a false notion. I think people avoid salespeople at all costs. And if there's another option, they're going to take it. I'm just challenging you here a little bit.
Yeah. And so I do think eventually it will get to this point where an AI can do all of these things. But I think to get there, we're a ways away from being able to, one, just the straight up latency, two, the complexity of the conversations. And I would disagree with currently that people don't want to talk to a salesperson, because I think let's take buying it or building an SDR team or outsourcing an SDR team. If you come to 11x's, AI agent and you're like, hey, let's have a conversation about this. Are you really going to trust that 11x's AI agent that knows everything about sales development and everything about 11x is going to give you a genuine answer about, whether or not you should go with 11x or build your own?
Not today.
But
neither will
fast forward.
Neither will
fast forward 5 years. See, that's where I disagree. I think
when is a human not going to tell you to buy their product?
I have. And I think there are great B2B salespeople that look at a customer not as a future commission check, but as a doctor would look at a patient and say, let's understand the shape of your problem. Let's make a recommendation for, hey, I think you should do this. I think you should do that. I've got 2 customers right now that came to me because they wanted SDR teams. Mm-hmm. I had to not take their money. For one of them wanted to spend a lot of money to build a team of like 6 SDRs. If I had an AI SDR as an AI as an SDR, like a full-on salesperson, not just an SDR, but as a full-on salesperson, I'm pretty confident that AI salesperson, I would have trained them to close, because this is an extremely nuanced conversation where I need to influence the prospect on, yes, this is what you want, but it's not going to align with your long-term strategy, and it's actually the wrong decision. And what they needed to do is strengthen their product market fit, not invest a big chunk of their war chest in building an SDR team. And I think yes, you will be able to train AIs to do that, but I don't think companies will do that. And so I don't think humans will ever develop a level of trust with an AI salesperson to say, yeah, I'm going to trust everything that you say as true and fact. And so I do think we will get to a point where in sales, the trustworthy human B2B salesperson that runs the diagnose and, I'm going to diagnose, let's understand the situation. Let's go with a diagnosis. Let's make a recommendation. I think that salesperson is going to, be the person who is the best salesperson, at least in our next 5 or 10 years. And like, who knows what beyond that, but I still don't think I would have the same level of trust of an AI said this thing and I'm 50-50 on it versus a human that I have a real human emotional connection with. And I believe this person because somebody referred me to him. Like I think the old school sales is coming back. That relationship sale. Hey, I trust Collin because, he helped my friend and I just don't think we'll get there full stop with AI salespeople.
So the idea this brought to my head is one that a handful of people have brought up on this podcast, and I almost forgot it. But what some people have argued is that the concept of an AI salesperson, for all the reasons that you just said, wouldn't work. It's a trust factor. It's like, do you want to talk to a super intelligent thing that's just going to beat you out on every line that you say? Like, it's going to always have like a better way of persuading you. Yeah, like you're up against like you're never gonna.
That's why I don't want to sell against Brian. I don't want to buy from Brian because
right.
I know I'm gonna lose. And I don't mean this as a shot against Brian. I just mean he's an amazing salesperson, and I actually probably would want to buy from Brian. But you get the idea.
Yeah. So what someone brought up, I can't remember who it was. It might have been multiple people, but what they said that we all seem to not be thinking about at all is that maybe the concept of using AI to make a purchase is not that we would be using like a sales tool. It's actually that we'd be using something that is separate from the companies. Like maybe there's going to be people who create like buyer enablement tools where you go there and you tell it your problems, and it's not a salesperson for one company. It's designed to help you pick the right tool. And so in those instances, if something like that comes out, I would imagine it has to. Some people seem to think that that's just what ChatGPT will be for this purpose. And it's already being used like that today. Like if you need a tool, you can go and ask it, tell it your problems, all this stuff. It's going to give you a nice solid list of, contenders that you can consider and all that stuff. So in terms of what AI's impact has in sales, it may be more in that realm. It may be more that it's this external thing that buyers are using, and they're bringing that information perhaps back into that conversation with the salesperson or whatnot. But in terms of that future of that role, like I completely agree with you. There's some safeguards in place for humans. Number one being that the cold call, you can't do it through a robot. It's illegal. And I don't foresee that changing. That would be crazy if they reverse that. So
even if you could, you still probably shouldn't.
Yeah, you shouldn't. And social media, I mean, people are already starting these AI accounts and stuff, and it's just like, it's nonsense. I think we're probably a short way away from before they start banning that crap because it's just too much noise and it's ridiculous. And so I think, the way I look at it, just to summarize, and I agree with a large bulk of what you've said there. A lot of it's still to be determined, I guess. But I think the human SDR, or whatever you want to call the role, has a very long future. I think what they do and the tasks that they complete will evolve over time because there will be tools that can automate stuff. And maybe they get to a place in some orgs where the email is like almost 90% automated and they're focusing the bulk of their time on social media, on LinkedIn. Like, I think we're probably headed more in that direction where like email just becomes more automated than it has been in some cases, right? It's going to be different. And the more complex it is, the less automated it is, of course. But I think staying on the phones, staying on social media, having a big presence on social, I think those are the things that we're going to see become more and more critical. We really already are. I don't know an SDR today that's not on LinkedIn. And if you said that 5-10 years ago, there were plenty that just weren't even on there, right? So I think there's a lot changing there. I want to get your thoughts quickly on this topic, and then we'll jump into predictable revenue. What do you think's going on with this go-to-market engineering role? Do you have any thoughts on that? It's, people are describing it as different than RevOps or sales ops. Wherever you want to go with that, I just want to get your thoughts on its importance, essentially.
I said earlier, we put a pin in SDRs using Clay. And I don't think an SDR should use Clay. I don't think, let me rephrase that. I don't think most SDRs should use Clay. you need an advanced understanding of the market and all the things. And I mean, to use Clay, you can go like for an SDR, you can go grab, a list, and it certainly makes it easier. But I think where we're at now is if you're good with Clay as a go-to-market leader, you can build a system that doesn't require human input and will you like. Let me give you an example. I got a client that wanted to reach out to a very specific type of company, right? That level of specificity doesn't exist in any Zoom or Apollo or LinkedIn drop down. So we said, okay, what's the employee range and the geography? Then I wrote an AI prompt that said, hey, look at the LinkedIn description and tell me if they're at this company or not. And yes or no, and give me your reason. And then we ran that and we checked it, we gave it a bunch of training data, and then we pushed it like an entire market, like 17,000 companies through this prompt and said, hey, let's look at all 17,000. Now let's use this AI prompt to filter down to the right 2,300 that actually meet these criteria. And it was actually more, and then we filtered down and filtered down. Then we passed those 2,300, and this is all using Clay to, a bunch of the waterfall enrichments that said, okay, go find the email, then pass it to Zoom it or to zero bounce to make sure it's valid. Then go get the mobile number and then add it to a sequence and outreach. The SDRs are benefiting from Clay, but they should never have to touch it because that's a pretty complex workflow. Like it sounds simple enough, and I think it's relatively straightforward, but it took me a while to figure it out, and I've been using Clay for a couple of years now. I've had the luxury of sitting down with the founders of Clay and having them kind of show me the cool pieces. I've talked to their early product folks, and back in the early days of like their Slack was incredible. The founders were there, their product leaders were there, and I'm sure they still are, but I just don't use Slack anymore. These are workflows that your average SDR isn't going to be able to grok the entire process, especially if they're 3 months and you just hire them at university. This is something that somebody more senior should be able to set up so that when the SDR shows up, they are not looking for emails. They're not researching. They are not trying to find a mobile number. It's just there. It's in their sequencer, and they just have to execute. They have to do the things that humans are uniquely good at. If your SDRs are doing any form of manual research, you're probably wasting your time, or your lunch is going to get eaten by somebody using a tool like Clay or somebody using one of these AI SDRs, because the human doesn't add any value in the process compared to an AI. An AI, a well-written prompt can do a much better job than a human at scale because it can do it fast. And especially for like really, really simple stuff, the new 4.1 model, 4.1 nano or whatever it is, I just ran it Friday on a list of like 30,000 folks, and it cost me $8 to look at 30,000 companies and tell me yes or no this one thing. That is something I previously would not have been able to do. And so I like to have these company account classifiers that say, hey, look at this company, tell me if it fits in these categories and is it a good fit or not. Then I like to have a contact classifier and says, hey, look at these contacts, tell me if there's a good classifier. Because we all know the first page of any list, you look at Apollo, you put your filter criteria and you're like, oh wow, these are perfect contacts. Then you get to like page 10 and the quality starts to drop off. And this is not a shot at Apollo or Zoom or any of those tools. It's just the algorithm's going to show you the best matches first, and there's going to be a drop off. But we as humans have this assumption that if the first 3 pages are good, all 128 pages are going to be great. But that is not the case. And so having account classifiers in there and contact classifiers in there allows you to pipe this whole system where you can filter an entire market and answer these questions and then have it automatically added into your sequencer. Like that you could not do 12 months ago. You could, but it was janky and it didn't quite work, and your OpenAI credit cost would be insane. But now with these new models, it's almost irresponsible not to be doing this. Like every company should have an AI prompt looking at every one of their accounts and every one of their contacts before a human looks at it to make sure that it meets these X criteria and it is the right person for them to be reaching out to. And then if it meets those criteria, you should spend as much money as possible making sure you have the right information so that when your humans do go and spend their human time and all their gelatinous goo trying to make these dials and type these emails and use their gray matter for what it's best at, they have all the right information. So they're only dialing to direct dials and cell phones. They're only going to email or reach out to folks on LinkedIn that are really likely to be good fits. And when you have a tool like this, you can use it to sort and score and optimize so that your tier one accounts get this type of approach, your tier two, your tier three, your tier four, they're all handled differently. And in the past, these were really complicated things that were really hard to set up.
Yeah.
They are, I won't say simple, but they are very straightforward to do in Clay with a couple of AI models. And so I think this is where this go-to-market engineer piece is coming from, where I think if you're not using this, like right now, anybody who's doing this is probably getting alpha from their competitors. By the end of this year, this is going to be table stakes. And if you're not doing this, it's going to be really hard to succeed. Things are just moving that quickly.
Are you seeing, or would you should suggest? So you don't want the SDR tinkering around in these tools. I mean, maybe a little bit. Ideally, centralize this. My thought was, and I had Michel Lieben on the last episode, who runs Cold IQ. And when I said it with him, I thought they were outbound, SDR agency, but he corrected me. He's like, no. We're specifically doing go-to-market engineering. That's our focus. That's what we do. So do you agree with what he said is basically, whether you outsource it or not, it sounds like you agree that this should be a specialized role that serves the team rather than something you're trying to basically teach to everyone on the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a great tool, but it's also a spreadsheet. And like we're building, and when I say we, I mean like anybody who's doing this is building a fairly like technical spreadsheet, right? And I wouldn't trust a junior employee to build a spreadsheet that's going to drive my entire go-to-market decision-making process. Just like in the early days, you wouldn't let your SDR pick the list.
Right.
Or some companies did. They said, hey, here's the playbook. Go read this literal binder. And then you go look at this list of companies and tell me which ones you think are are the best fit. Like, well, maybe you should give some more training, some more guidance, some more examples. Humans aren't that great.
And
I
so
mean,
I've seen what salespeople pull up when they just try to run a report in Salesforce and they put one wrong filter or something, and they think that the thing's accurate. Like it takes one little mistake to really screw things like that up. So yeah, I'm
totally
with you there. But does that maybe that carries us into the next question, which is what does predictable evolve to today? What do you guys, it sounds like you teased at it earlier that you basically shut down the outsourced SDR, which I didn't know until you said that. So what are you guys doing today?
Funny. We do quite a bit of whatever you want to call that Clay stuff. Please don't call it Clay agency stuff. I hate that word. Just like I hated smarketing back in the day. Anybody who said that, I was like, oh, I can't. I don't want to hear that.
I've never heard that one. Smarketing, people said?
Smarketing. It was like when sales and marketing were coming together, and it was just, it's just bad. It was just bad. Yeah,
I don't know where go-to-market engineering came from. People just started saying it, but
yeah,
it seems
it evolved from salesmen. It evolved from like Salesforce admins, and then you were RevOps, and now you're like a go-to-market engineer, which is like, I would argue that this new, whatever you want to call it, is really what sales development leadership is all about. It is taking the playbook, the process that you have developed, and finding a way to enable it with a specific set of technologies. Clay just happens to be a really good technology for putting your entire sales development playbook in and saying, okay, if this, then that, and building these really complex things. And so I don't know if I agree with go-to-market engineering. I think it's just sales development and leadership, like good sales development and leadership. This is the new role. Our role has evolved, and it's just what you have to do if you want. It's table stakes now, or at least it will be in 6 to 12 months.
That's an interesting take, and I hadn't thought of it that way. I mean, I had thought that if you don't learn this stuff in the leadership realm, like you're toast, right? You have to know it. But your point makes a lot of sense, is that maybe you don't even really necessarily need separate functions for this. If you have a manager or leader who really knows this, that kind of is like what they should be doing.
I like to think of building any team as like people first, right? And then you need process to enable the people. And then you need technology to enable the process, to enable the people. It's got to be in that order. And the leader needs to be able to see those three things. You need to be great at hiring the right folks, building the right process, and then finding the right set of tools to enable the process. You cannot start with the technology. As cool as Clay is, if you're building an SDR team right now, you should not start with a blank Clay sheet. I would really struggle not to because that's the way my brain works right now. But you got to start with who's the right person. You actually got to start with a bunch of market math to figure out how big is this market and what style of sales development should we be applying? Should we be investing a ton of human time in each individual prospect, or should we be full on AI SDRing it because we've got to figure it out? And like, there's a whole bunch of different gradients of sales development in between.
Yeah.
And so that's really your first exercise as a sales leader is a math one. I'm sorry. And then the next one is, okay, for that given process, who are the right type of SDRs, right? That we need to hire. Are they really great at cold email? Are they really great at cold call? Are they really great at LinkedIn? Are they really great at with the specific thing that we need them? Then you need to hire those right folks. Then you need to build that training, that process, that playbook for them to enable the really great folks that are really aligned with the really great strategy that you came up with, which is mathematically pointing to the right folks or the right set of companies and people. And then you need the right set of tech and tools, right? If you've got 100,000 target accounts and each of those has a few people that you can reach out to, and your product is below 10,000, worth less than $10,000, absolutely you should be using AI SDR. It would be foolish to do almost anything other than that. If it's above, your product's above $10,000 in ARR, and you have like less than 100,000 target accounts, you probably should be using a human for certain parts of the process. How much of that process kind of depends on how the math shakes out.
Yeah.
And so all of these things need to be in alignment, and it's the sales leader, the sales development leader that needs to be doing these things. I don't think you can just strap on a go-to-market engineer and call it great if all of these things aren't in alignment. It needs to be somebody in a sales leadership position. And I think we're going to see this comment level up and level up and level up. And it's not just a go-to-market engineer, it's a go-to-market leader, right? This is going to level up to the chief revenue officer owning this motion, and not necessarily the execution of the motion, but they're going to own the development of the math, the process, the strategy, and it'll be other people executing the layer. Because if you can do this for your sales development program, why wouldn't you be doing this for your account management program? Why wouldn't you be doing this for the companies you're targeting through your inbound, through your ad spend, through your email marketing, through all of these things? And so I think kind of Clay is the gateway drug or sales development is the gateway drug for Clay into the rest of the organization. Mm-hmm. And I do think you do need a whole sales leader. And I do think eventually this is going to be something that is a C-level priority. Just like Lars Nilsson would say, sales development deserves a seat at the executive table. I think this is the evolution of Clay, the evolution of go-to-market is going to make that statement even more true.
Yeah, it becomes more of a science and a strategy, right, than ever before. Mm-hmm. Less brute force and more real strategy there. Totally. Do you want to clarify who should reach out to Predictable Revenue? Like, who's a good fit to work with you guys today?
For sure. We do kind of three things. We help founders find their first customers. We help founders build their first sales teams. And then we do this, whatever you want to call what I just described, go-to-market engineering, Clay work, but basically using what we know about building sales development teams to help companies implement Clay, build an SDR team that is powered by Clay.
You're helping them build in-house teams.
Exactly. We're not doing outsourcing anymore.
Okay, so that's all you've really changed. You took the outsourcing piece out.
We are no longer building, what I wanted to be working on was, I'm going to give you some of my time, and I'm going to create something that if you turn off my personal billing, I've created lasting value in your organization. I'm building this in, you can take all the things that I've learned building this agency, that we've learned building this agency, because it's not just me. There's a lot of, there are others that are doing this at PR, but you're going to take everything that we've learned and you're going to let us build it into your house so that after a couple of months, you have a fully functioning system based on everything that we know. And then you can turn the crank, because the person, like the thing I learned with the outsourcing team and the whole outsourcing experiment is that you should not invest the same amount of resources in an external resource as you would for an internal resource, right? You're not going to put an outsourced SDR through your regular, in-house training that's going to be 2 weeks of being off the phones and not having anything. You
don't own the equity in that, right?
Exactly. You don't
Yeah.
own the upside and the outcome,
Yeah.
even though that is the right thing to do. And so the right way to train and onboard an SDR is true whether you insource it or outsource it. Outsource it. The problem with outsourcing is it doesn't make sense to make that level of investment in an outsourced resource.
Hmm.
And so I just got tired
They
of
end up
building.
wanting to recruit them when they do that, right? I've seen that happen on RevOps. They'll outsource the RevOps, build a real tight relationship with who they're working with every day, and then they
Mhm.
end up recruiting that person. And now the
Yeah,
agency just lost that person.
100%. And
Yeah.
you should. And so I just got tired of this model where my model was at odds with my customer's model. And so now our model is let's help you build lasting value within your company using sales development, using Clay, using all the tools and the tech and the things that we know. The things that I like to do personally are like helping with new founders sharpen their go to market and sharpen their product market fit, the strength of their product market fit. Because I think the number one thing that I've seen across, I don't know, we probably talked to 6,000 entrepreneurs about should I have an SDR team or not. And the number one thing is strength of product market fit is the greatest lever of whether or not your go to market team is going to actually
Yes.
succeed.
Yes. I would say the same thing for the sales team overall. I keep pounding that message home, which is like sell for companies that have real demand for their product. The world is
100%.
just flooded with junk that no one needs or wants. Yeah.
When I was running the email only like the email prospecting service, it was like 2015, 2016. We had Krista was our best person. She was booking like 60 meetings a month for call it just to make the math easy. It was probably fewer clients, but let's just call it 10. So let's just say she was booking 6 meetings a month for 10 clients. We had, and I can finally say this on podcast because their legal team just approved this case study in the book. But we had Uber come on as a customer, and we helped build their first sales development team. And to start, they outsourced it to us when they launched Uber Eats.
Mm,
And Krista went from booking 60 meetings in 1 month, and when we onboarded Uber, she booked 327 meetings the very next month.
wow.
Did
Cold
Krista
calling
magically get
restaurants,
all email, 100% email?
but
But
restaurant
did
outreach to restaurants.
restaurants?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough. I
Did Krista
did it
magic?
firsthand, that single platform. I know it's not easy.
Hell yeah! Like, did she magically get 6x better, or was their strength of product market fit that much stronger that it just carried everything she was doing that much farther? And that was the
Bingo.
customer that like really helped me see the impact of that. And I went, holy shit, this is true for all of our customers. And that's when we started looking at strength of product market fit when we were kind of bringing on new customers. And this was always kind of the battle of like, oh, we only want really strong product market fit customers. I'm like, if we could detect this in a sales call, we shouldn't be an outsourced agency. We should be a venture capital firm.
Yeah. The proof's in the pudding too. I mean, just you look at any list of like top salespeople over the last 5 years, but they're like all from Gong and Outreach. It just happens to
Uh-huh.
be like two of the best products, right? Right? I mean,
Totally.
it's not a knock on their ability, but it's when you
No,
add
not at all.
great sales talent and you mix that with a product that people actually want and need, that's when you're
Yeah.
going to look like a superstar.
It's also why you can't trust any sales advice that you see on LinkedIn. No offense to you, who's great on
For
LinkedIn,
sure.
because what worked for you at
Yes.
Aircall isn't applicable to me and my startup that doesn't have strong product market fit because you're going to do the same things. I could copy your playbook exactly, your motion. I'm selling Aircall competitor too. And I saw this after we did Uber. We had like 6 companies that were fast followers of Uber that were like, oh, we heard you did Uber. We want you to do the same thing for us. The best got like a fraction, like
Yeah.
not even half. It was
Yeah.
like, I don't know, a tenth of what Uber got.
Yeah.
And then the next one got half of that. And then the next one got half of that. And it was just a steep slope from there.
Yeah.
So
Not surprising at all. You have to, I mean, great point on the LinkedIn. And I think I've said this in a few of my posts along the way, but for anyone who's listening, like, don't just trust everything I say or anyone reads. Like, your job is to take it and filter it down to what's useful for you. And some of it you may just throw right in the trash. A lot of it you may. You have to find what's applicable. And yeah, it's
anything's worth a test, but don't expect the same results from like that Collin got at Aircall in the early days in cold email when cold email was like going gangbusters. Just like if you read Predictable Revenue today, I argue it's still a great book.
Mhm.
There's some like really good stuff in there, especially around the specialization.
Yeah.
But if you try the tactics in this book, you know, it's a 20-year-old book at this stage, or
Yeah.
at least the tactics in it are 20 years old. If you try exactly those, it's probably not going to work because it's been there, it's been done, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're not Salesforce in 2004, you know, like that was a very different market circumstance. it would probably work for the next Salesforce in 2004 company. I
Right.
am seeing this with the companies. It's one of the measures we look at is reply rate and like the positive conversation rate. And we use that as a proxy of like strength of product market fit, both for like working with early founders to kind of sharpen product market fit and say, hey, this vertical really cares. That vertical doesn't care so much, is we look at those like conversion rates through the funnel.
Well, if people are collecting dust on their predictable revenue book, you've got a new book coming out. What is
Mhm.
it about?
It's about what we talked about, how to sharpen your the strength of your product market fit, how to find, if you've how to diagnose your team, if you're trying to do something and it's not working, or if you're just getting started, how to know how to time your go-to-market investments right. And then it kind of covers basically I'm trying to draw a line between the customer development world of like, hey, let's interview our prospects or interview potential customers and figure out what it is they need, and then draw a line connecting that to the sales world because you absolutely should sell to this group of customers that said, hey, my hair's on fire. I need this. But so many founders I talk to don't go back and sell to them. They treat it as like a university project and they interview all these folks. Then they write the report, they submit it to the teacher, and then their VCs go, okay, go sell some stuff. And they're like, cool. And then they buy Apollo and then they go into the company's list and they're like this, and they're like, why doesn't my cold email program work? And like, well, you don't know enough for it to be good. And so we kind of help companies with that transition. And this is the journey I've been on the last 13 years. I've helped, I mean, probably talked to 6,000, 7,000 companies about this. Haven't worked with all of them, but I've had this conversation many times. And so that's what the book is about, is finding product market fit, sharpening, strengthening your product market fit, and then building your first go-to-market team. And there's some stuff in there for founders that have never sold before to kind of demystify what does really good B2B sales look like? Like any of the stuff around, the diagnosis of figuring out the situation, diagnosing, that kind of stuff. It's in there of like how to be a decent salesperson without, if you don't come from sales. So it's called The Terrifying Art of Finding Customers. It'll be in stores in October.
Is it already on pre-sale?
Yep.
Okay, because I've got the link down below. So that link is correct, right?
You bet.
Awesome.
We're just starting the pre-sale campaign. We're going to have benefits for anybody that buys the book before it comes out. There's going to be, we haven't figured out all the things, but we're going to do at launch, we're going to do like a group where we like read a chapter at a time and kind of get a Zoom call and talk about, what that chapter meant and, any interpretations or any questions. So that's definitely one of the things we're going to be doing. I've got a few other things. I've got a founder group that I'm working with right now. Just founders under $1 million in revenue. We meet once a month and we kind of work on diagnosing problems and figuring things out together. And so there's going to be something else related to that and some community, but it's still April. It's coming out in October. So I got some work to do, but yes, the book is available for pre-order. If you buy it, shoot me an email with the receipt and I'll make sure you get on that pre-order list.
Awesome. Hey, this is good stuff. We ran way over, but we covered so much, which is awesome. And this is probably long overdue. So thank you for joining me. Best of luck with the book. I will be grabbing myself a copy as well. Keep me posted. Let me know what's going on, and we'll have to catch up soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Collin. It's always great to geek out on the nitty-gritty details of sales development with somebody who gets it.
It never gets old. It never gets old. Where should people follow you? Obviously, you're on LinkedIn. I've linked your Twitter or X below. Anything else you want to throw in there?
I think the place that I put the most time and attention to is foundersedition.co. It's a newsletter I write for founders, and that's where you're going to get my most recent unfiltered thoughts on what's going on in the go-to-market world. So I've got about 50,000 founders on that newsletter, and then everything else is kind of an offshoot from that. So I think if you're curious, go check out my writing there. If you want to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn. Collin with 2 L's, Stewart.
It's the only right way to spell it. That was foundersedition.co. I'll drop it in the notes. Was that .co, right? You said?
You got it. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, man. We'll have to catch up soon.
You got it. Thanks, Collin.